Shalom, friends. Good morning. I must say that it is a bit unfortunate to start like this. And this day and age, given how far we have come as a society, we continue to have to battle the oldest hatred in the world. On the bright side, our fight against anti-Semitism has brought us all together today. Take a moment to look around you, all of you. We are here today, together in this room, refusing to cower when it comes to anti-Semitism. As proud Jews, we are bound to one another, a family that sticks together through the good times and the bad times. Our unity is our strength, and our voices are our most powerful instruments, so use them. I'm so glad to see you all here, showing up and speaking up for the community as we face the dangerous rise of anti-Semitism, not just in America, but worldwide. When the Pittsburgh Tree of Life massacre took place, as Israel mourned alongside the families in Squirrel Hill, our consulate, the Israeli consulate, asked, how can we help? How can we help the community? Within hours, Ambassador Dani Dayan arrived to show support to a community in grief. And then also within hours, a team from an Israeli trauma organization got a plane to Pittsburgh. The emergency healers, the Israel Trauma Coalition, was formed to help survivors of war and terrorist attacks. They spent the days following the synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh with first responders, therapists, victims, parents, children, and then, to provide some desperately needed comic relief, smile-boosting medical clowns from an Israel organization called the Dream Doctors came to Pittsburgh as well. Anti-Semitic attacks in the US affect Jews all across the world, including the Jewish state. When you're in pain, Israel is in pain too. And we do what we can, not only to heal the pain, but also to prevent it from ever happening again. So every year in Jerusalem, the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs gathers an active coalition of leaders, diplomats, clergy, journalists, concerned citizens, dedicated to the defeat of anti-Semitism. This forum, together with a conference for Jewish educators at Yad Vashem, are only two examples of how Israel is on the front line and is trying to also combat anti-Semitism. It is an old, ugly custom to scapegoat Jews for society's ills. We see that happening now, once again, as hatred towards Jews links the far right to the far left. And yes, that includes anti-Zionism. Meanwhile, social media, sadly, spreads that hatred as the conspiracy theories blaming Jews gain traction online. These are troubling times, and that's why it's so important for us to join together in unity and to speak up. We have to. We know far too well what can happen when the flames of anti-Semitism are not extinguished early on. And we all know that what starts with the Jews never ends with the Jews. So as an Israeli millennial, I have a few questions that I want you to think about. How can we think outside the box to prevent anti-Semitic attacks before they happen, not after? How can we create dialogue to encourage more acceptance? How do we protect First Amendment rights while preventing lives from being endangered at the same time? We create laws for drivers when it comes to speeding in their cars as a means of providing safety, right? So perhaps we can think of how to do the same thing when it comes to incitement. So before introducing our next speaker, I want to say that as an Israeli millennial, I cannot deny that I'm worried. I am worried about anti-Semitism in general, but also as a diplomat here in America. And though I'm concerned, I know that most Americans refuse to normalize this or any form of bigotry. And I know that we, as Jews, cannot hide. We must combat anti-Semitism with love, with dialogue, and with education. So by making the choice to be here today, you are each of you is a Jewish ambassador. Keep your heads up and remember, we are family. You're not alone.
So welcome to the Jewish National Fund House. I think this is such an important group of people. I wanted to tell you that as I was thinking about what I was going to say today, I was walking in and there's a picture right outside this door of Theodor Herzl. Theodor Herzl was 44 years of age when he died. That means that in his 30s, he created a movement that I dare say in his 30s was greater than any other movement in the history of the world. The Zionist movement to bring us none other than the land of Israel for the Jewish people everywhere. And when you think about how many times this event was posted, that we're live streaming, that we sent out our texts and our emails and our WhatsApp, Theodor Herzl sent out a letter. Oh, that's a thing with a stamp on it. And he had to mail it overseas and wait like 6-7 weeks for an RSVP. But he gathered a group of people from throughout the world, and he got them to start a conversation, to stand up to anti-Semitism and to stand up for the dream of the land of Israel for the Jewish people everywhere. So when you walk out today, you can look at that photo. You can look across this room at all the young people that are here, and you can see that you have that opportunity to change the world. Who was he? No different than you. He saw it, he felt it. He was not elected to any job. He just decided it was time, as all of you have decided today. I want to introduce our panel. They'll come up. They'll be seated. I'll ask them some questions that we received, and we're going to ask the same questions of all of them, and then we get to see what kind of time we have. First, Melissa Weiss joins Simon Wiesenthal. You get to take your microphone here. Center as this National Campus Outreach Director in 2018. She previously served as Director of Policy and Strategy at the Israel Campus Coalition, overseeing national and local campaigns to strengthen support for Israel and American college campuses. Bryan Leib joined the Israel-American Council of New York as its Program Manager of ACT-IL, an online community of over 15,000 volunteers who are taking positive actions to support Israel, fight anti-Semitism and BDS. Daniel Cohen is campaigns manager for the World Jewish Congress, and he is part of the team that has led in the 2019 hashtag We Remember campaign, which reached over 800 million people. Avi Posnick is the regional director of Stand With Us. Stand With Us is the international Israel education organization that supports Israel around the world by educating and empowering students and communities. Avi was very active in leading many campaigns and public demonstrations in support of Israel and to call for the extradition of Nazi war criminals living in the United States and countries around the world. Thank you to all the panelists, and let's get started with some questions. I'm going to ask the same questions of all of you, and I'll start first with Daniel with this question. How does your generation, how's the millennials, learn from the Holocaust, from the past, and apply what you have learned to what's currently happening on anti-Semitism in 2019?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. First, I'd like to say thanks to Bryan and thanks to Russell for having us here. I guess a lot of what I've learned about the Holocaust I learned from my grandmother, who's a Holocaust survivor. She was born in 1930 in Berlin, and the thing that I think she always drove home for me is something that I think we're seeing today, is that it didn't, start with the gas chambers. It started with hateful messaging in Berlin. They would see it on the streets. Jewish businesses would be vandalized. Then she lost her citizenship, and then on Kristallnacht, in 1939, she was forced out of her home, and her father, my great-grandfather, was sent to Sachsenhausen concentration camp. And that's kind of the way it went. I mean, now our home's a gay club called XXX, so it all kind of worked out. But it's, it doesn't just start with the gas chambers. It starts with the hateful messaging, and I think that we see a lot of that today. And I think we're seeing a lot of the monikers and a lot of the symbols that we saw in the lead up to the Holocaust. And the important thing for us, for millennials, is to notice these symbols, to notice these messages, and to react to them, whether they're online, whether they're on our streets, whether they're in our schools, or in other forums. So that's number one, because it's a broad topic. I would say first we have to confront the hateful messaging that we're seeing everywhere. And the second thing that we have to do is that we have to confront a generation of apathy and people who want to look the other way. If we look at the lessons of the Holocaust, it didn't just happen because of Hitler and the Nazis. It also happened because everyday Germans and everyday Austrians and people all over the place were willing to look the other way while these mass atrocities were being committed. So it's up to us, particularly in this generation where we're all on our phones. I'm sure some people are on their phones right now, so it's okay. But where we all have the inclination to look the other way, to not look the other way, to address these problems head on. So that's how I would answer that question.
So Melissa, how do you believe you learn from the past and teach the generation today?
Sure. So I think one thing that's really important is calling out acts of hate and acts of anti-Semitism when we see it, even when it's not convenient to our political beliefs or to who we support. So I think we're seeing something constantly, right? Which is Congresswoman Omar says something and Republicans pounce, or someone on the right says something and Democrats pounce. But they never seem to pounce on the people from their own party. And I think that that's something that's really dangerous, because anti-Semitism and Jews become a political football. I think it's been 2 or 3 times now on Twitter that there's been something that Congresswoman Omar has said, and then Congresswoman Cheney has tweeted something, and then someone else has picked up, and it's been a back and forth. And you know whose voices aren't heard in any of that? It's ours. Now, the Simon Wiesenthal Center doesn't just combat anti-Semitism, we combat hate in all its forms: sexism, racism, classism. And I think that that's something that's really, really important, especially now. You were talking about apathy. We are the generation of apathy. And something that has frustrated me over the last decade working in this field is, we're constantly talking about how we marched with Dr. King and Jews were among the freedom riders. And that is fantastic, and that is so important, and that changed a generation. But that's not our generation. That was our grandparents' generation. What have we done since then? Where are we now? After Trayvon White, after Eric Garner, Sandra Bland, where have we been as a Jewish community? We know what it's like to be persecuted and to be attacked for who we are. We should be standing up. I think there's something like 20 black trans women who've been murdered in the last 7 months. Where are we? We need to be speaking up. And if we're not going to speak up for others, no one's going to speak up for us.
Thank you very much. Avi?
So first of all, again, thank you for the invitation to be here. Thank you to all my co-panelists. I agree, obviously, with everything that was said so far, that it is important for all of us to speak up. And we all know the phrase, those who forget history are destined to repeat it. And I think that from what I've heard from many people, Holocaust survivors, people who are children of Holocaust survivors, right, we're seeing similarities of how things built up, right? It was said that it didn't start with the gas chambers, it started with words, it started with hate. And all of us have the opportunity and the requirement to speak up, to give back, and to fight against anti-Semitism. Whether it is, condemning the hate that we see, but it's also important to educate ourselves and educate our friends in the next generation, right? Education, we believe at Stand With Us, education is the road to peace. And the more we educate ourselves, the more knowledgeable we become about what anti-Semitism is, right? What are some of the modern day manifestations of anti-Semitism? The more knowledge we have, the more power we have to give back and make a difference.
Bryan?
So agree very much with what everyone has said so far. And I think that we have to call attention to some of the extremely alarming statistics that probably a lot of us in this room know, but don't take it for granted that your friends don't know about it. The fact that there's 66% of American millennials that cannot identify what Auschwitz was. The fact that there's this apathy about Holocaust. It really starts there. And a lot of this hatred too, by the way, is starting online. There's so much hate online towards Jews, towards Israel, towards people trying to diminish the memory of the 6 million Jews that perished in the Holocaust. And it's our responsibility as Jews, as millennials, to make sure that we continue to keep that memory alive. So along the lines of what everyone has said today, when you see something, you have to call it out. You have to speak up about it. Don't be afraid.
All right, thank you. So the takeaways that I heard there was, we have to fight apathy, we have to educate, we have to call it out, we have to have our voices heard, we have to start our own messaging and our own story and not sit back on just the stories from generations past. I'm going to bring this question to start with Avi and go down the panel. What is your organization, what are organizations doing on college campuses to support the Jewish community to fight anti-Semitism?
So one of the things that Stand With Us is known for is helping students on college campuses, but our strategy also begins before students get to campus. We've been doing a lot of work with high school students to educate and empower them, as well as middle school students. We've seen poll after poll, study after study that has shown, that says that younger generations are losing their connection, losing their affiliation to Israel, don't understand what anti-Semitism is, and this is something that is scary and very troubling. And this is something that we have to do more of to educate the younger audiences before they get older. One of the newest initiatives that we're rolling out now is the Stand With the Center for Combating Anti-Semitism, the CCA, which will work to identify, define, expose, and act against anti-Semitism. It's something that will strive to work together with many organizations, many of them are in this room today, to leverage what we all bring to the table. And I think that's something that's critically important. If we really want to be successful, we all need to work together because we're all in this fight together. And the last thing I'll mention, among the many other things, it was talked about just now about social media and the hate that we're seeing there. One of the things that we have also is something called truestory.org, TRU story, which will, by going to that website, going to the app, you can type in a question, you can type in information, you can ask what is anti-Semitism, and it'll give you that information, or take you to another website or link that has it. And it's something that is shareable and something that you can use online to really educate yourselves and your friends.
Say it again, True Story.
Truestory.org, TRUSTORY.org.
All right, Daniel, what is your organization doing on college campuses?
Yeah, well, I think we can all agree that the campus, along with social media, is one of the key battlegrounds now in the fight against anti-Semitism. And we're particularly seeing this in the conflation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. So where Jewish students who are potentially not Israeli are targeted by people who are anti-Zionist, that's a problem because you're conflating two issues. As much as it pains me, I'm 11 years out of college, which is kind of difficult to think about. But
Me too.
yeah, 11 years as well, right? It's tough. But to have the inside perspective of college students, number one, is essential because they're the ones who are living this on a day-to-day. Now, our organization firstly does a lot of work on social media to monitor what's going on college campuses, as this is also a battleground for anti-Semitism. But we also run the Campus Pitch program, which is where we provide a forum for college students to promote ideas that strengthen ties between college students on campus, Israel, Jewish issues, and then our organization both funds them and provides professional mentor support so they can execute those projects. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Bryan. Yours?
So the Israeli-American Council has a joint venture with ACT-IL. ACT-IL started in Israel at IDC Herzliya. And it started to really call attention to what was happening in Israel and the bias that we were seeing throughout the world towards the IDF and towards things in Israel. And today it's morphed into 15,000 volunteers that are taking actions every 5 to 10 minutes, anytime, anywhere that they can, on their apps or on their phones. And it's things like, if there's anti-Semitic tweets online, we're mobilizing our community to report that tweet, to get that tweet taken down. On the flip side, when there are positive things that are being pushed out there into the world, we are also activating our community to say, share this, spread the love around. So if you're not already a member of the ACT-IL community, it takes 2 minutes to download the application and you can do your first mission. And that's what we're doing at ACT-IL. And then also IEC has a group called Mishelanu. Mishelanu is college-based and it's for Israeli Americans. Not so much about fighting anti-Semitism, but providing a home away from home for Israeli American students. So Shabbat dinners, speaking Hebrew, and things along those lines. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa?
So who's ever been to an arcade or a county fair and played whack-a-mole? Okay, so that's basically what it is working on college campuses right now. There is always something. You wake up in the morning and you sometimes don't know where you're going to sleep that night because something is going to pop up, whether that is a swastika on a campus or flyers, eviction notices posted on dorm room doors, or a surprise BDS resolution. Anti-Semitism on college campuses is so rampant that there's no way to track it all. Amcha Initiative does a really good job, but there is no comprehensive way to scan every single police report, every local news report. There's just no way to do it. There's no way to aggregate all of that data, which kind of speaks to how bad it is. And something that, I'll get to what we do in a second, but something that I just want to point out is a shift that we are seeing on college campuses. We used to just see BDS resolutions, right? Or boycott the state of Israel, or boycott Caterpillar and Motorola. But what we're seeing now is something much different. We're seeing a shift away from BDS, the way that we know it. There were about 30 anti-Israel resolutions this year. Only 20 of them were BDS. The other 10 were a range of things. At Pitzer, it was condemning the president because he refused to end a study abroad program with Haifa. At the University of Michigan, it was in support of a professor who refused to write a letter of recommendation to a student who wanted to study abroad in Tel Aviv. And further, we're seeing efforts to eliminate the definition of anti-Semitism the way that we know it, the State Department definition. It's like going to an African-American group and saying, we don't like your definition of racism, let's define it for you. Right? That would never fly in any other group, and that's what we're seeing. And so to that effect, the Wiesenthal Center is doing two things. On one hand, we're doing rapid response, right? Something pops up on a campus, I'm there, someone's there. We're working with students and with professionals to figure out how we want to respond. What's the most strategic response? What's the response that when a professional leaves, the students are happy with? You know, they're comfortable because they have to live there long after we're gone. So on one hand, we've got the rapid response. And then on the other hand, we've got a ton of exhibitions and films and speakers who appeal to the broader campus community. This last year, I did a lot of work with someone who's a former neo-Nazi. He's German. He started a number of KKK groups after being radicalized as a teenager through the internet. And bringing him to campus it allows Jewish students to reach out to other minority students who've also been othered and targeted because they all understand the same kind of hate. We've got a great summer internship program. It takes place here in New York City, and they're not actually in our office. We take our interns, we've got 21 this year, and we put them in local government offices, so assembly offices, state senate offices, borough president's offices, so that they learn about how to move things along, how to get things done, how legislation works, how advocacy works, how you convince people to join up with you, and how you form alliances. And that serves them well much beyond the summer. It's something they take with them forever. And if government service is for them, which we hope it is, then that's all the better. So.
Great, thank you. And I'm just going to do, the takeaways was high school, we have to start younger. And I happen to agree 100% that we have to get into the high school arena as well. We have to work together. We have truststory.org, ACT-IL is certain apps. We're going to talk about apps in a second. That anti-Semitism is popping up in new different ways, and that we have to have a rapid response to it. We have to work with the students, and we have to watch that the definition of anti-Semitism is being coerced and changed, and we have to be on top of that well. We talked about a couple of different apps. The digital space is the positive negative. Everybody is out there, and everybody is out there. So Bryan, how do we harness the power of social media and online communities to fight back against anti-Semitism and delegitimization of Israel?
Yeah, so another plug for ACT-IL. ACT-IL is a platform that gives all of us in this room and everyone that's listening and watching this live feed the opportunity to take positive actions for the state of Israel while they're sitting in their pajamas without really having to take too much effort. You'd be surprised how much taking 5 to 10 minutes every day to support the state of Israel, to fight anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism really helps the cause. And another piece that I want to tell you about that ACT-IL is doing is every week during the school year, we're bringing college students together to come up with creative social media campaigns based on what they're seeing on college campuses. So, there's so many different tools at all of our disposals to fight anti-Semitism. I think the common theme that we're all hearing here is that a lot of it is online. Not necessarily that it starts online, but that's where it's creating this critical mass. It's a quote-unquote safe space for people that have this hatred for Jews, that have this hatred for Israel. And we need to make sure at every single opportunity that we're speaking up about it. Me personally, I'm from the school of thought that every time we see something, we need to address it. I know some people perhaps don't want to, but I think the moment we stop addressing it and start calling people out on the carpet for what it is, it's going to keep growing.
Melissa, how does social media, how do we harness that power?
So I think I'm the naysayer here, and I say that as one of the earliest adopters of Facebook, about 6 months after it launched, came my freshman year of college. I think that what we see on social media is not reflective of real life. Yes, that is where radicalization can and does happen. But the bulk of people who are on there are normal people. They are us. And I think we really have to think when we're interacting on social media, when we're posting and tweeting and whatevering, we have to think about our audiences. Who follows you? Who is paying attention to your things? I see so many people who will, tweet up a storm, and they'll have to just tag, all the journalists they can, because they don't have an audience that's, going to be able to amplify their messages. We have people who are tweeting exclusively to the Jewish community, but if you're preaching to the choir, then you're not changing any minds. I think we need to take things offline. And I say that as someone who's worked in the Jewish space, but also out of it. And for a lot of people who I've worked with, I'm the first Jewish person they've ever met. And I think that makes a bigger impact than tweeting out something to, the couple hundred people who are already on board with what you're saying. If people know you and really know you and know that you're an advocate for the cause that you're in, they know I'm a proud Zionist, but I'm also not going to talk about it every time we're together. It's one part of who I am. Our Zionism is one part of who we are, but it's not all of who we are. And we need to find ways to connect with people who are not Jewish, who are not Zionists, who don't think the way that we do, and build real and genuine relationships with them. And that's the way that you move things forward. And that's the way that you change minds.
Daniel, how do we harness it?
Well, that's a good question. I happen to take a slightly different approach than you, but that's okay. And I think that we see anti-Semitism online in a real 360-degree way. We see it from lots of different angles. We see it from the far right. We see it from neo-Nazis. We're seeing it, as we know, recently from white supremacists. We're seeing it from the progressive left. We're seeing it from Islamist fundamentalists. And that 360-degree attack requires a 360-degree solution. Now, not every single one of us can monitor everything, but if everyone can kind of keep their side of the street clean and know what's going on in their community or with the issues that matter to them, that's the first thing we need to do. And the second thing, does anyone here like bumper stickers? I'm like a big bumper sticker guy. Like when I'm walking around the city, I'm like, hey, that's a great bumper sticker.
Not a lot of takers in the audience.
Not a lot of takers of the bumper sticker. Well, there's not a lot of drivers in New York, which is smart. But I saw a bumper sticker last week, which I really liked, and I really think is relevant to this situation. And that's, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And one of the things that you see from anti-Semites all over the internet is that they promote their opinions, but they don't promote facts. They promote misinformation about Jewish communities and Israel across the board. And it's up to each and every one of us to say, hey, that's not true, that's not the way it is, and we're gonna fight back. And that's why national communities online of Jews can fight back, and local communities can fight back. The important thing is to keep your side of the street clean.
Avi?
So just to piggyback off of what Daniel just said, there's a saying out there that a lie is halfway around the world before the truth had the chance to get its pants on. Especially now with social media, once something is out there, it's out there. And we know that, especially for students today, this is how they're getting a lot of their information, right? They're going on social media, they're going on Facebook, they're going on Twitter, they're seeing things on Instagram and many other social media platforms. And this is one of the reasons why about 7 or 8 years ago, Stand With Us got into the social media space. And today, at peak times, we're reaching about 100 million people a week around the world. And we told that number to someone, and they said, why is it that Jewish organizations only reach the Jewish audiences? And I said, I wish there were 100 million Jews in the world. It would be amazing. But yes, there are many, many dangers with social media, right? As I said, it's a way for haters to spread their hate, to spread their lies, to spread their misinformation, but it's also an opportunity for us to spread the truth. It's an opportunity for us to respond to things that we're seeing that we know are not true, right? If you see something, say something. It's something that we all have the obligation to do, but it's also an opportunity for us to put out positive things, to put out the truth and to be proactive. On all of our different social media platforms, in whatever language you want, we all have the opportunity, right? They say nowadays that every single person with a smartphone is a journalist, right? Everyone can put out a story, everyone can share information. And this is something that we can use social media in a positive way, in a proactive way, and also in a reactive way when we see something.
So thank you, and I'm going to take the takeaway there is that first off, I thought it was great as a take-back message. Take 5 minutes. Take 5 minutes in a day to do something, to read something, to hear something, to post something, to go. That we always have to look at beyond just our own audiences and just preaching to ourselves, as important it is to make sure that we're educating and preaching to ourselves, that we have to also think beyond the social media, that we have to start having real conversations, real relationships, and with real conversations with real people. So beyond the social media piece, and yet we cannot ever just stay quiet, because as you say that once it's posted, it's a fact, and unless the fact is talked about, it is posted as the fact. So I think that those are important takeaways. I'm going to ask this question because you brought it up in some of your conversations. Here's a lot for unbelievably great organizations doing unbelievably great work. There is hundreds of Jewish organizations that are doing work at all different levels in the Jewish world. And on college campuses, there are close to 100 organizations that are working on the college campuses. So Melissa, I'm going to ask you, start with you with this question. What are the dangers that we have as Jewish organizations fighting anti-Semitism in those silos alone and not having a unified message or a coordinated effort?
I mean, they say that not being unified was why the temple fell, right? Isn't that right? I mean, I'm not a rabbi, but that's what I'm told. Listen, it's very dangerous. What we saw, especially on the college campuses, as recently as 5 years ago, there were dozens of organizations. Nobody was talking to each other. No one knew each other. And then the Israel on Campus Coalition kind of burst onto the scene, and they started getting everyone together, bringing together all of these professionals from all of these organizations, and all of a sudden we were talking, in the same language. We were using the same data. We were all given access to all of this information and to each other's resources. And as soon as that happened, the dynamic on campus changed. All of a sudden, there's a coordinated effort, and we were working together, and we were empowering students. We weren't coming onto campus and saying, we know what's best for you. We were going onto campus and saying, what do you think is best, and how do we help you get there? So in the campus world, I think that's changed it has changed the game. If you look at, for example, the BDS numbers, I think it's 2015 to 2016, BDS on campus dropped by like 30%. It was because all of a sudden, Jewish students, Zionist students, were pushing back with a unified voice. And so I think that's something that could and should be replicated, in the millennial group and beyond us. I know William Daroff is the incoming head of Conference of Presidents, and I know that he'll do an incredible job bringing people together and speaking with one voice and on the same messages.
Thank you, Bryan. What are the dangers that you see Jewish organizations not being unified, not working together?
The danger is Pittsburgh and Poway continuing to repeat each other over and over and over again, which is probably the worst thing that could possibly happen to us as Jews in America. I don't think we're ever going to see a Holocaust again, but there potentially will continue to be more isolated incidents like this where Jews are dying. And Jews are dying because people have this hatred towards us, directly towards Jews, towards Israel, towards Zionism, towards a whole myriad of things. But I think it's so important that all of us as millennials, as Jewish organizations, as Jews, as Israelis, as Americans, unite together to say that anti-Semitism has no place in America at all. And if we continue to have that type of unified message, we're going to start making a dent in what's happening. Just recently, the definition of anti-Semitism has changed and evolved. And there's organizations throughout the country that can't seem to agree on what anti-Semitism really is. And from my perspective, anti-Semitism is very simple. It's the hatred of Jews, and it's the hatred of the nation state of Jews. And if we can come together under that very kind of quote-unquote simple, understanding, then together we're going to be better as Jews. Because the people that come against us, the BDS supporters, the people that hate Jews, they have a very simple message. They're probably very different in a lot of ways in terms of who they are as people, but they have one thing in common. They don't like Jews or they don't like Israel. So we as Jews need to have something very similar in common ourselves to say anti-Semitism is the hatred of Jews, anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism.
Avi, how do we work together? How do organizations, what's the dangers if we don't on college campuses?
So the danger is that we lose if we're not working together. We see what the other side does, right? They have one message. They say the exact message every single time, at every single event, at everything that they do, and they're all working together. They don't care about who gets the credit. They don't care about who came up with the slogan first. They just repeat it over and over again. They say the exact same thing. They are on message. When we talk about a winning political campaign, right, it's one, and Bryan, you can vouch to this, right? It's one that has a good message. It's one where your people are saying the same message. You're staying on message and getting your point across. And I think that if we as a Jewish community, if we as people who want to fight anti-Semitism, people who want to stand up for Israel and empower the next generation, we have to have a unified message. We have to be working together. We have to leverage what we all bring to the table to make a difference. Each and every one of us, organizations up here, organizations that are represented here, and those that are not. Russell, as you said, there are about 100 or so, if not more, Jewish organizations. We all have our strengths. We all have our expertise, and I think we have to share those expertise with each other, share best practices, and again, leverage what we're all bringing to the table to make a difference, because that's the only way that we're going to win, right? Strength in numbers, and that's the way the Jewish people have continued to survive.
Daniel?
Well, I once again might take a slightly different approach to this. I'm a bit of a realist, so I think that maybe having a fully coordinated and unified approach, given the fact that we're all Jews and 2 Jews, 3 opinions, is not always a practical thing. But I think we can have a collaborative approach. I think one of the things that we need to look at is the rifts within ourselves. There's clearly a rift between Israeli Jews and diaspora Jews, religious Jews and secular Jews, Republican Jews and Democrat Jews. So I encourage everyone here today to see someone who's maybe not like you and reach out to them and talk to them and understand what it means to be Jewish. Because we're really, when we work together, we're the best team in the world. We're better than the 90s Bulls. We're better than the Patriots right now. We're better than anybody. But we can also have the ability to be our own worst enemies and get in the way of what we're trying to accomplish, which is fighting anti-Semitism, fighting the delegitimization of Israel, and fighting BDS and making sure that our kids on campus are safe. When I was working in Greece, I was working on the refugee crisis. And we had a term for certain people who wanted to do better than other people, although we were all trying to be there and do the best for ourselves. And that term was called voluntegos. It's 2 words. It's volunteer and egos. And as organizations, we all have maybe disparate methodologies, disparate ideas, but we all have the same goals, and we have to make sure that we don't become voluntegos where we're trying to help people more than other people are trying to help people. No, we're fighting anti-Semitism harder than you're fighting anti-Semitism. No, we know the facts of the Holocaust better than you know the facts of the Holocaust, because in doing so, we can't create internal rifts amongst our organizations, and we're not able to reach our goals in as much of a collaborative way as we possibly can. And maybe we can't have a completely unified message and unified goal, but we can collaborate to tackle different things that are facing the Jewish communities and make out better as a whole in the end.
Thank you. I think that the great takeaway there is unity and collaboration, that we have to look at the data, and we have to also talk. We have to build a bridge of communication between right and left, a bridge of communication between young and old, between religious and not religious. And we have to understand the strengths of each other organization that brings it to the table and bring that collaboration from all of our organizations together so that we could be single messaging, not on the message, but single messaging on our fight. So I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to start with Avi. Israel's existence, how does it play a role in combating anti-Semitism in today's world?
That's a good question. And, one of the things that we often hear people say is that Israel, the modern day state of Israel, the reestablishment of the state of Israel, came into being because of the Holocaust. And I think it's something that if we know our history, that's simply not true. Had there been in Israel, a modern state of Israel, during the Holocaust, there wouldn't have been a Holocaust. And I've heard stories many, many times from people who were alive in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. I was born just after that. Where they said once, 1967, it was one of the proudest years, one of the proudest moments. People felt pride in Israel. They felt pride in being Jewish, right? Israel was and is a place that Jews can call home. Israel is a place that no matter where Jewish people are around the world, as Almog said in her introductory remarks, right? Where when you grieve, Israel grieves, right? Israel is a place, is a country that is there to protect us. It's a place that we can turn to when we're in trouble, and it's something that I think is a great part of the story of fighting anti-Semitism, right? The return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel, to their ancestral homeland, is one of the greatest social justice stories of all time. And I think that's something that we have to feel pride in. It's something that we have to share with our friends, with our families, with our children, with our grandchildren, and be proud of our story.
Daniel, thank you.
It's a little tough to answer this one after Avi, but I guess I'll just say briefly about my story. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and I did not come from a family that had a strong connection to Israel, although we had family members who were from Israel. And growing up, I faced a lot of anti-Semitism, and kids would actually say, knowing I'm Jewish, go back to where you come from. And I was like, I didn't know where that was. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor from Germany, and my parents are from Forest Hills. So it was a bit of an existential crisis. But I think had I grown up with a stronger connection to Israel, it would have helped me combat anti-Semitism from a younger age, and would have helped me from a personal standpoint and a mental standpoint, because I didn't know so much about the Jewish homeland and the importance of what it is to the Jewish identity, not just for Israeli Jews, but for Jews everywhere. And I think that we need to do a better job of proving and showing young Jews all over the world that, Israel is also your home. Israel also has your back. And I think a lot of the problems that we see on campus and with kids in school would be solved if we were able to integrate Israel into their lives from an earlier standpoint.
Bryan?
So I want to take this opportunity to bring to everyone's attention what's happening in California right now. By show of hands, how many people are aware of the California Department of Education's proposed ethnic studies curriculum? Okay. Make sure everyone that didn't raise your hand knows about this afterwards and tells all your friends and gets them involved. There's a direct correlation happening in California right now where they are trying to weave into the fabric of the curriculum to erase Israel, erase Jewishness, and to start studying certain role models, which I'm not going to name, that a lot of us in this room agree are not role models. They are people that support BDS. They are people that attack other individuals. So that's first thing. If you don't know about this, please find out about it and get involved with it, because it's scary. As people in this room, on this panel, Russell, everyone that have been fighting BDS our entire lives, if this happens in California, it changes everything. So we cannot allow this to happen in California. With regards to Israel and anti-Semitism, from my perspective, I think I said it earlier, I look at anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. Zionism is the Jewish people's right to self-determinate. So when you tell me as a Jew that I can't self-determinate where my homeland is, that's anti-Semitism. So, I think in short, We need to be loud about saying that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. And I think, Daniel, you mentioned a little bit about this too. We have to be proud of who we are. We have to be proud of everything that we've accomplished and the things that we've accomplished as a minority in America. The things that we have done is nothing short of remarkable. And the things that are happening every day in Israel are nothing short of remarkable. From being top 5 in innovation in the world to little things like you can't navigate on your phone in the city driving unless you have Weiss. The things that have come out of Israel to help the entire world need to be celebrated in a more open way.
Melissa?
So I've spent the last half decade working almost exclusively with college students, and I can tell you that nothing changes someone's mind about a BDS resolution or about showing up at an Israel Fest short of going there. And the communities recognize this, right? There have been a number of trips over the last few years. Caravan for Democracy is a great one that JNF does to bring non-Jewish student leaders to Israel. And when they're there, I mean, they are seeing everything. I staffed a David Project trip a few years ago where we spent the morning in the West Bank. We met with Fatah leaders. And then we had a tour guide who was pretty anti-Israel. And I was on the trip, and I'm like, what is going on? And then a few hours later, we're back in Jerusalem. We're having lunch in a park, and we hear sirens. It was the day, it was early 2017, January, there was a car ramming attack and 4 soldiers were killed. And my students heard the sirens because we were that close. And they spent the rest of the day in Efrat, actually. We went back and went to settlement, and they spent the day because our bus driver said, come, we'll relax for the afternoon. I'll get you snacks, we just need to decompress. And so that's what they did. And those kids then spent the next 4 days processing what it meant that they had spent the morning with a tour guide who had defended Hamas and said that they were a part of Palestinian society, and then hours later listened to the sirens coming to the aid of Israelis who were murdered, and then hearing that Hamas was celebrating those deaths. So there's nothing quite like experiencing Israel to really change something. But we also do something that I think does a disservice to our community. We treat Israel like it's Jewish Disneyland, and it's not. Israel's a real place, and they've got real problems, and it's a new country, and they are still working out all of the kinks. And I think we really do a serious disservice when we come out with Hasbara talking points, cherry tomatoes, and cardboard bicycles. If you look at the polling data, that's not why Americans support Israel. It's not because, drip water irrigation. It's because Israel is America's ally in the fight against terrorism. You don't ever see a summer blockbuster about cherry tomatoes. You see a summer blockbuster about killing bad guys. That's what Americans support, and we need to recognize that. And we also need to be careful about who we bring to the States and what voices we amplify here when they're not from our community. We can't tokenize people because we hate it when the other side does it. We hate it when Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar do it with If Not Now, but then we do the same thing when we take members from these other communities and say, well, look at them, like this is the one Zionist in this whole group of anti-Zionists. We're tokenizing just the same, and it's really going to be dangerous in the long run.
Thank you. So I'm going to take a takeaway. Israel is the home of the Jewish people. We have to unite about the story. We have to tell the story, the relevant story, the stories that are there to go out, to talk to the people about why Israel is our homeland, why the why is the very important, and I love the story, tell the greatest social justice story in the history of mankind, the establishment of the State of Israel, and to do there. So I'm going to ask you to do 1 minute closing, your message out to people, what they have to do, what they should do. What is that thing that you want people to walk away with? And Avi, you're first.
So I think my message is educate yourselves so you can educate others. At Stand With Us, we believe that education is the road to peace. The more education we have, the more knowledge we have, the more information we can impart on others, the more information we can share. The more we can correct misinformation, the more we can correct it, and the more proactively we can tell Israel's story, we can tell the story of the Jewish people. And I think that whether it's going on to Stand With Us' website to see some of our materials, and I know Hannah from my office has one right here, or many of the other websites, all of our websites who are here, JNF, the organizations that are represented here, there is so much information that is out there, so many things that we can learn from. There are people who we can learn from. And I think that the more knowledge we have, the more we learn, the more we educate ourselves, the more of a difference we can make, and the more we can empower not just ourselves, but the future leaders for Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah, I'll kind of echo my message from before. Obviously, I'm from the World Jewish Congress, so we represent 100 Jewish communities across the globe, and I tend to view Jewish issues in that perspective. We know we're all part of the same corporation, even if we're different divisions. So the key for us is to put down our differences. Whatever differences we have amongst us as Jews, it's time right now to put them down. It's time for us to come together and, if not coordinate, then to collaborate on the issues that face all of us as Jews. Does anyone know what the Never Again Education Act is? Does anybody, can I see a raise of hands? How many people have supported it already by doing something? Raise your hand if you have. So I'll leave you on this note. So currently we're running a petition. Obviously the Never Again Education Act will provide the tools and the funds necessary for teachers to hopefully teach the Holocaust in America's public schools. It's in Congress, it's in Senate right now. Currently we're running a petition calling on both Congress and Senate to pass this act. If you do one thing today, along with what these guys asked you to do, if you do one thing today, go on change.org and sign our petition. We're currently around 30,000 signatures. Every signature helps. We need to have Holocaust education taught at our schools. Let's do it. Thank you so much for having me today.
Okay. I'm going to call Melissa first.
Okay, so on the Never Again Education Act, so there's a law that was passed a few years ago that says that if any piece of legislation in the House, I think it's 290 co-sponsors it needs, it will automatically go to a vote. So I think it's close. I don't think. Right, so we're 50 away. So go look online, see if your member of Congress is a co-sponsor, and if not, make that phone call and ask why not and when it's going to happen. Listen, we need to be talking to each other, and we need to be listening to each other, and we need to be talking to people who aren't like us and who, maybe have never heard what we have to say, and we have to be building those relationships because we can't do this alone. We know what happens when communities get siloed. There's going to be no one to speak for us outside of us, and we need our allies, and they need us. And so the more that we can go out there and be part of our communities, get involved in the activities you like, in the things that you like. It's what I tell college students all the time. Don't just go to the Jewish events. If you're interested in the newspaper, join the newspaper. If you like Ultimate Frisbee, there's like a team for that. Go out there and be all of who you are, and don't silo the Zionist part of you, because that's a part of you. And the more you're out there and engaging with people who are different, the more understanding they'll be of who you are and the things that matter to you. I think that's my message.
Before I call on Bryan, I'm going to ask him to come up. Next week, just to show you the change, I talked about Theodor Herzl. You talk about anti-Semitism. You talk about anti-Israel. Next week is a plane load of 350 people from the United States who are moving to Israel. The largest aliyah to Israel is not from the former Soviet Union. It's not from France. It's from America. It is a change of a relationship between a country of exiles to a country in which you just say, I'm coming home. That is because we stand up and we talk. Bryan, thank you, and thank you for closing.
Thank you to you for coming to today's Millennial panel discussion on anti-Semitism in America. It's amazing to see all of your faces, men and women, Democrats and Republicans, secular and observant Jews, and yes, even Yankees and Mets fans, and there's even a couple Phillies fans in here as well. Us right here. But we're all in the same room together to learn about the tools at our disposal to fight back against anti-Semitism. The reality is this, and it's a harsh reality. From New York to California to Florida and all around the country, Jews are under attack. The bigots that walk into our synagogues to kill our people, that draw swastikas in our playgrounds, in our schools and community centers, have a unified approach. But we as Jews have been lacking to have a unified message about how to fight anti-Semitism. Some Jews, as I mentioned earlier, can't even agree on the very definition of what anti-Semitism is. That needs to change. It's time for us, millennials and Americans, to take full ownership of this cancer before it spreads even more. It's time for us to say anti-Semitism is a hatred of Jews and of the nation state of the Jewish people, Israel. So here's my request. Today I'm asking for you to make a personal pledge to speak up louder than ever before, to organize more than ever before, and most importantly, to unite as Jews before it's too late. Now I want you to look at the person to your left or to your right. This goes for everyone in the audience here. I want you to look them in the eyes. I want you to reach out your hand and shake theirs and pledge to work together to fight anti-Semitism. Will you shake their hands? Good. Now we're in this together. By shaking hands and locking eyes, you've made a pact. I also want to take a moment to ask you to think about why fighting anti-Semitism is important to you. For me, it's personal, and for you it should be as well. You see, I'm the first grandson of a Holocaust survivor, my dad's father. And my mom's mother, Naomi Klein, who passed away 4 years ago, was, without a doubt, the strongest Jew that I ever met in my life. She never wavered in her support for Israel, for Zionism, and for the Jewish people. And I was taught from a very young age, both directly and indirectly, from getting Israel bonds for my birthday, and I cannot imagine, Russell, how many trees have been planted in my name by my grandparents, to instill that sense of pride in me as a proud Jew. The actions that I take as a Jew leading up to today, and for the rest of my life will be to keep my grandmother's legacy alive. So I'd like to close with this. Ladies and gentlemen, today's message is crystal clear. The time is now for us to come together to fight for our people, to fight for our very birthright, to fight for our future here in America, in Israel, and throughout the world. The time is now for us, millennials and Jews, to take ownership and to lead this fight against anti-Semitism. And know this, we are here, we are the future, we are the now, and we aren't going anywhere. Ladies and gentlemen, the time is now. Thank you for coming.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please, indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.